Liberal Currents presents Half the Answer with your hosts, Caitlin M. Green and Trent R. Nelson.
You know what they say, Trent. Happy days are here again. I am Galinda the Good Witch, and with me is not Willie Nelson. Who are you again, Trent?
Bill Django here from the book and movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats. Well, this is half the answer, isn't it, Caitlin?
It sure is. It's the place where when you know the thing you want to ask, then the answer is already like halfway there.
That's how we do it here. And Caitlin, it has been a jam-packed several weeks. We've been chatting with so many remarkable people. A lot of first-timers onto the program, but not today. Well, who do we have with us today, Caitlin?
Oh, I don't know, Trent. Just a returning champion. We have Layla al-Sheikh, a Palestinian-American organizer, writer, and commentator. And we're going to continue our talk about Palestine, Israel, and the stuff that has happened and is happening and will continue to happen there. Layla, how's it going?
It is going, I would say, not great, but given recent developments, it's an interesting time.
Oh, yeah. We are always living in interesting times, are we not?
It's too much. Everyone's shaking at this point. Well, Layla, let's jump right into it. Why are the times so troubling? What has been going on since last we spoke? Obviously, we're in the midst of this horror that has persisted for decades, specifically for years at this point. What can you tell us about what's been cooking?
Well, since we last talked, which had to be months now,
Yeah.
a lot has happened in specifically the Middle East. Since the attack, which I'm sure most of your viewers are aware of, since the attack on Doha by the Israeli military in an attempt to decapitate the Hamas political bureau leadership, including Khalil al-Hayya and other top negotiators, which was widely regarded as a failure. It failed to decapitate the political leadership of Hamas. Since then, there has been one might say, a renewed attempt to, one might also say, resolve the conflict in Gaza. And I caveat one might say, because the attempt that we have seen, insofar as the details have been made public, looks remarkably like a lot of the details we have seen over the last 2 years. As of the day that we're recording this, it's October 7th. It has been 2 years of genocide. It's been 2 years of unmitigated assault on civilians. It's been 2 years of largely passive Western onlooking at this in tandem with American and British and German complicity. And in the midst of all this, at various junctures, whether under the Biden administration or under the new and current Trump administration, there have been attempts to resolve this conflict by way of promoting this sort of apolitical framework for post-war governance and for the disarmament of Hamas. And I'm sure we'll get into details in a little bit. But as of speaking right now, there are negotiations happening in Egypt, and there will be continued negotiations tomorrow. I just saw a bulletin that noted that the Turkish intelligence chief will be attending those tomorrow. So it looks like there's been a serious renewed push to implement this apolitical, technocratic, and sort of, I don't want to say nonsensical, but sort of anti-sensical plan. It may well work insofar as it ends the bombing for a period of time, but I don't believe it will resolve the underlying issues because it doesn't attempt to do so.
Right. And again, let's dig a little deeper into that. Can you explain to our listeners what you mean when you note that the negotiations have thus far been looking for an apolitical solution? Why would that fail in achieving the sort of macro goal of not only stopping bombings, but actually providing some type of peace?
Yes. So first, I would to anchor the conversation and to give a good comparative framework. I just read this morning an excellent piece, which I believe was released this morning in The Guardian by Patrick Wintour. He's the diplomatic editor of The Guardian. It's titled something like Diplomacy's Lowest Point. And it does an excellent job, I think, of framing two different attempts at resolving the conflict. One is what is now commonly known as the New York Declaration, which if any of your viewers have been following, the Emmanuel Macron-led French government, alongside Britain, Canada, Australia, and a handful of other governments, have been attempting to create a post-war framework that explicitly is tied to the 1967 border partition framework known as the two-state solution. There are a bunch of political action points in there. There are explicit references to the resolution of the refugee question. There are explicit references to Palestinian statehood. There are explicit references to the withdrawal from all of the occupied territories and a capital in East Jerusalem. Whatever one might think about the two-state solution, which we can also talk about that at a later point, it is a political solution. It is an attempt to be a political solution. By contrast, you have the U.S. proposal, which has come out in more detail over the last couple of weeks. And the U.S. proposal is largely rooted in the same foundations as the previous administration proposal. I'll call it the Blinken proposal for a bit of brevity. And for those who don't know, here are the core foundations of the Blinken / let's call it the Witkoff proposal after Steve Witkoff.
Sure.
The Blinken and Witkoff proposals both have a couple of fundamentals in common. One is the withdrawal, and when I say withdrawal, I mean in a very vague sense. It doesn't really define what that means. Of the withdrawal of the IDF from the Gaza Strip and the opening up of humanitarian aid. The deployment in place of the IDF of a multinational, predominantly Arab stabilization force. This could come via a United Nations Security Resolution. This could come via a Arab League invitation from the PLO, which is based in Ramallah. It could come in a variety of forms. But those are the two core fundamentals. And then there are a bunch of rotating parts who will be technically leading the civil administration. Will it be a technocratic Palestinian administration, which is what Hamas had agreed to last December in conjunction in talks with Fatah, which is the leadership of the PLO, and which they have been proposing repeatedly. It could be a non-Palestinian Arab civil administration with U.S. oversight, which is what the Trump administration proposal proposes, and so did the Biden administration proposal, except that the Biden administration proposal explicitly said the PLO would invite this administration. There's no reference to that here. Both proposals say that eventually the Palestinian Authority will take over Gaza Strip. Neither clarified what that meant. No time frame, no concrete conditions to fulfill in order for the assumption of governance. And both, shockingly, I'm actually somewhat surprised, both made cursorial references to Palestinian statehood. Point 19 of the Trump administration proposal recognizes the right of Palestinians to their aspirations of self-determination. And I just want to say, though, that doesn't really mean anything. The U.S. has said this for decades. There's a new book out by Robert Malley, a former U.S. negotiator who worked on the Oslo Accords. I can't remember the name right now, but it's a new book about the two-state solution. And it's largely about how this has become a sort of self-serving rhetorical device. But this is what the proposal is. It may very well be implemented, even though it's quite apolitical, even though it doesn't address the fundamental concerns of the Palestinian people, or even the fundamental desires of the Israelis. It's really a deferral of sorts. And one can think a deferral is good, but I'm inclined to think that it would really only repeat the mistakes of the past.
Right. And again, an apolitical solution seems, from our perspectives, to be a waste of time, delaying, pushing off. But to an administration that has aspirations, perhaps, to do as the president has noted, to make Gaza into something that none of us would recognize, an apolitical solution is probably just the ticket, actually, because while you give lip service to self-determination, as you noted, Layla, it's just the same old song and dance. It's what America did with the native population over the 19th century, and it's certainly what it suggests Israel do over the 21st century.
Yes, I do think there is a significant element of U.S. self-enrichment at stake here. There are multiple points in the Trump proposal. I don't have it on hand, but I believe it's point 8, 9, and 10 that refer to tariff exemptions, a global economic free trade zone, all sorts of things like this. A consortium overseen by the U.S., a board of peace, all of these things. You can see a little bit of a inspiration being drawn from like the Bosnia and Kosovo model. You can see a bit of the governance over the indigenous tribes of the Americas, of course, like you mentioned. And you also see a bit of this desire to emiratize or Gulficize the Gaza Strip.
Right.
This attempt to make it into something of a new UAE or a new Qatar. And for whatever one might think of these countries, I don't think very highly. It's not what the Palestinians want. It's not what the
Right.
Palestinian national movement has ever desired. The Palestinians, for all the variety of political inclinations, Islamism, democratic secularism, anything in between, communism, all these things, there's a very vibrant demand for a democratic structure. Nominally, the state of Palestine would be a democracy. There have been elections in the past. Prior to the ossification of the PLO, it was quite a vibrant international organization that had strong participation with the diaspora. It's a deeply political culture. And I think the UAE model and the Qatar model are very anti-political. And the goal here is obviously to enrich oneself, enrich the Trump administration, allow Israel to continue to enrich itself off of occupation. And another note I think is as important to note is that this Arab multinational force, absent a clear political pathway, and it has to be more than a pathway even, and absent a clear political end goal of statehood, this is just the subcontractual transfer of occupation to the Arabs on behalf of Israel, a sort of repeat of what the PA has become in the West Bank, the subcontractor of the occupation on behalf of Israel. Israel remains able to enjoy security control, or what we would know as sovereignty, over all of the land, while the Palestinians and the Arabs enjoy a falsified civil control over trash pickup or school textbooks. What does that mean in the context of a state? It means nothing. So,
Layla, it's dreadful, and as you noted, it's this current snapshot of the crisis dating back several years. It's seen Benjamin Netanyahu leading it this whole while. If this Witkoff agreement is not so different from the Blinken agreement, then why would Benjamin Netanyahu, why would he be inclined to accept such a deal now? Is it perhaps because of who is the president in the United States?
yes. While I am a feverish dissenter of the idea that the previous administration had no leverage, I don't think this was a very convincing case at all. You hear it quite often from Biden administration officials. I do think that it is true that Trump as an individual has a lot more leverage over Netanyahu than Biden did. And this is for a variety of reasons, which are somewhat adjacent to the issue of being the president. Obviously, being the president, you are able to wield a significant amount of power. But Trump is significantly more popular in Israel than Netanyahu. Trump is far more unpredictable. Trump is far more willing to bend the norms of domestic and international policy to his desires, for mostly bad, of course. And this means that Netanyahu is more skittish. He's less willing to openly defy Trump than he was Biden. And to that end, while Netanyahu relies on Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the likes of the Religious Zionist Party and Osma Yehudit, this is only paling in comparison to his reliance on Trump for his political survival. in the forthcoming election, which will happen no matter what by the end of 2026. It could happen sooner. It could happen in November 2026. No matter what, he will be relying on his credentials with Trump to eke out another victory. He's going to say, I'm the one who can work best with Trump. I'm the one who can get the most out of Trump. I'm the one who can maintain sovereignty over the West Bank. I'm the one who can prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. These are very valuable things to him. And so, to that end, even if this deal does not secure him everything he wants, it nominally mentions the Palestinian Authority, which he repeatedly has claimed is the exact same as Hamas, to prevent the establishment of a state. Even if it doesn't have everything he wants, he could very well accept it now and later on try to alleviate the uncomfortable details, try to dispose with them. And so now I think the incentives have changed a little bit for him. It's clear that if a deal were to be made, that there would be votes to secure the deal from the opposition, only for a brief period of time so that elections could soon follow, which would inevitably happen if the far right dissents and leaves the government. And so with that in mind, it's very possible that Netanyahu takes the deal. On the other hand, I think something, and this is very crude to say, but it is unfortunately the case, especially now with Trump in power. A lot of these deals, so to speak, are often just fake. You know what I mean? Take for example.
No, really?
I know, yes.
No, he can just say, right? He can just be like, I did it.
It's quite a shocking thing. Not only does the president lie, but especially in relation to the Middle East. Oftentimes, I don't know who originated this phrase, but a ceasefire between Israel and the Arabs often ends up being that the Arabs cease and the Israelis fire. And that's what you see in Lebanon. That's what you see in Syria. Lebanon is the best case to look at. A ceasefire deal was reached last year, and who continued to fire? There have been over 8,000 airstrikes, I think, or 8,000 incidents of a violation of ceasefire since it was reached last year. And despite inching towards disarmament by the Lebanese state of Hezbollah, which I don't think will ultimately happen, the Israelis continue to bombard Beirut, continue to maintain their presence in southern Lebanon. The Israelis had a deal of an armistice with Syria. After the al-Assad regime fell, they incurred further into Syria after having already occupied the Golan, and now they occupy quite a large swath of the southwest. And see in the West Bank, of course, the Israelis signed deals with the PLO, nominally interim deals in lieu of a state, and settlements continued, and the occupation continues. The appropriation of Palestinian land continues. And so these deals are often fake, and it's entirely possible that a deal is reached, that the bulk of the prisoners of war and the hostages are released, and then Israel just continues. There are incentives against this. Trump wants to look like he solved an issue, and if he's undermined, he will be angry. But he has a notoriously short attention span, and he can quickly move on to another topic anytime he wants. You see that with Ukraine. He goes back and forth. Last person he talks to is the person who implements his policy.
Yeah.
And so he talks to Putin, and then he talks to Zelensky. So I'm very unsure as to the trajectory of the first phase. This is yet again a phased thing. So very well could be that we get that ceasefire, and then only a month later we resume.
Yeah, you can always kind of count on Trump to be Trump, which means you can't count on anything.
Yes, a very unreliable, in addition to the U.S. already being an unreliable mediator in the issue, you now have a principal who is frankly incapable of, I want to say intelligent thought, really. That's basically what you can really say.
More and more every day, too, you know.
More and more people are saying this. Yeah, absolutely.
What's that? Many people are saying, this is the meme president, right? He's very memeable, but he's also experiencing what looks to be extreme decline. So, you know, every passing day, it's just more of like a grenade with no pin in it.
Well, right now he's gunning for that Nobel Prize. I know that when we spoke with John Gazvinian regarding Iran, he is sort of chuckled regarding, you know, if Trump is still thinking about Obama. Trump is always thinking about Obama.
Yeah.
All right.
He's always thinking
That
about
is
Obama. He's always thinking about Hillary.
always. So while I love John Gazvinian, going to have to disagree with that one. He's always thinking about that. Obama has a Nobel Prize. He wants a Nobel Prize. Apparently, you get a Nobel Prize by stopping wars, and not by like helping to feed the world. So
Yeah.
there's that.
But like, with the Obama Nobel thing, it was more that he had the potential to stop wars. It wasn't even that he actually did it. It was like, we're
Right.
awarding him this in order to encourage him to do the right thing. So really, like, the more of a loose cannon you look like, maybe the more likely you are to get one of those Nobel Peace Prizes that are really just sort of a prod.
Yes, terrible. So well, with
Terrible,
that,
embarrassing, disturbing.
terrible, embarrassing, disturbing. But I want to, Layla, reach back for a moment, and you brought up the PLO. For our listeners who do not remember, that's the Palestinian Liberation Organization. At one point, they were the strongest force in the Palestinian political movement, but Israel did not very much like that, and they spent lots of time pushing for a greater Islamization movement, which I think they're paying for now. What can you kind of tell us about the PLO's current situation vis-a-vis Palestinians and Hamas, and what's to come in terms of political Palestine?
So this is a point of issue in which I think a lot of non-Palestinians quickly find themselves head spinning. Because if you talk to a 48er, which is a Palestinian citizen of Israel, or if you talk to a West Banker or a Gazan or a diaspora Palestinian, most of them are quickly going to note that the PNA, which is the Palestinian National Authority, and the PLO are two different organizations. They're functionally led by the same group, Fatah, which has its leader Mahmoud Abbas or Abu Mazen, but they are distinct entities. And so, for those who don't know, the PLO is in international circles and international law, the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. It is the entity which holds the non-observer or the observer state seat in the United Nations. It's the entity which holds membership at the ICJ and the ICC, at UNESCO, and all of these things. The authority is the transitional government which the PLO oversees in parts of the occupied West Bank on behalf of the Israeli state. It's not unlike a Bantustan of the apartheid regime in South Africa. And because of the Oslo Accords, which established the PNA, the PLO has become a gradually ossified body. It is not like what it used to be. There's some great work done by the likes of James Ryan, who you can find on Blue Sky, and other great journalists and analysts and reporters and academics about how prior to the establishment of the PNA, the PLO was this wonderfully complex, transnational, international Palestinian organization that had a Palestinian National Council, which was made up of Palestinians from all over the world. It had a litany of factions in it: Fatah, the Popular Front, the Democratic Front, a variety of other groups. Hamas has never been a part of the PLO, but it still does business with the PLO. It still affiliates in a tangential manner. It conducts talks. Both of them consider each other part of the national fabric of the Palestinian people, even if they are, so to speak, rivals, at least Fatah and Hamas, that is. And as for the current day, the PLO is not like that anymore. Much of its vibrancy has been outsourced. It's been depleted. Palestinian civil society in occupied East Jerusalem and in the West Bank has deteriorated. Its muscle strength has been degraded due to the occupation and due to Oslo. On the flip side, the Palestine solidarity movement internationally has arguably never been stronger. Sympathy with the Palestinian cause is as high as it's ever been. Organizers for boycotts, divestment, and sanctions are stronger than ever been. And the Arab diaspora in Britain, the UK, France and the US are more organized than they've ever been. And so you have this sort of weird uh, polar opposites going on. And this is not to say that the Palestinians in occupied Palestine are not struggling every day. They're the ones who live under occupation. They're the ones who resist both peacefully and with armed resistance. But to go back to the New York Declaration, which was the Macron formulated plan, there's just been this interesting attempt to resurrect the Palestinian Authority, to make it no longer this unpopular shell, this subcontractor. And with that, there have been promises made by Abu Mazen and the PLO for elections to come by the end of 2026 for the Palestinian National Council, or for the PLC, rather, the Palestinian Legislative Council, and for a new slate of leadership. Whether this will happen or not, I'm not really sure, but it was one of the promises made in exchange for French, British, Australian, and so on recognition of the state of Palestine. And there's been a fundraising boost happening for the Palestinian Authority. Much of its money is tied up by the Israelis. They collect taxes on behalf of the authority, and then they routinely withhold those taxes, even though it's obligated to hand it over, according to the Oslo Accords. And so France and Spain and Norway have been organizing for the disbursement of $200 million a month to the Palestinian Authority for the next 6 months or a year, I don't remember. And so there's these attempts to revitalize the Palestinian National Authority. The issue is, though, as we've talked about repeatedly and as hundreds of academics have talked about, you cannot solve a political issue with merely technocratic means. And I think this is something we see here in the US and everywhere else in modern politics. There's this attempt to satiate the political with a technocratic style. And technocracy is important. Having administration is important. No one can deny, for example, that a technocratic administration over Gaza, so long as it is Palestinian land, would be a significant step forward. You need the types of people who can build buildings, restore water access, resume schooling, rebuild the hospitals. But all of this is for naught if there's not a clear political mandate. We have a political aspiration. And so if the refugee question isn't resolved, if the question of sovereignty isn't resolved, then what exactly are we doing? That's the central question.
Absolutely. And I think that we keep sort of working to try to understand exactly where we're at in terms of negotiations, foreign policy, and trying to get some type of sturdiness between the Palestinians and the Israelis. But there is an elephant in the room, and that elephant in the room we have to get to, Layla, is that Palestine has been destroyed over the last 2 years in so many ways. It has been left in smithereens. So what does that look like in terms of actually rebuilding the lives of so many people who just in the last months have been traumatized, not to even speak about the decades of traumatization regarding the Palestinian people?
This is a tough question, of course. I think what I would say in terms of the practicality is that the proposal to immediately establish a technocratic committee over the Gaza Strip that is Palestinian-led, that Palestinians have control over, that Palestinians are able to oversee the direction of, would be a welcome step. I believe also that in tandem with this, there needs to be a recognition on the part of the Western world and on the part of, I think, the entire world, that the Palestinian question has always been a political one. I've seen before, this is a bit of an offhand, but I've seen before people say that the two-state framework comes from the 1967 United Nations Security Council Resolution 242. And this is a mistake people often make. But from 1948 to 1967, the international community widely regarded the Palestinian issue as a merely humanitarian one. If one reads these resolutions, if they read the texts of the time, the speeches of the time, the negotiations of the time, they'll find that Palestinians were widely regarded as just a nameless refugee population as part of the broader Arab nation. And in the decades following 1967, there was this revolution in thinking. The Palestinians are a unique people among the Arab peoples, because there are dozens of these groups among the Arab peoples. The Palestinians have a unique aspiration for a type of sovereignty or a type of restoration of their rights in historic Palestine. And this juts against the desire of the Israelis to maintain regional hegemony, to maintain a Jewish state, a particularist Jewish state, of the West to support that project, and so on. And I think so in the immediate aftermath of what's been going on, this genocide over the last 2 years, there needs to be a recognition that this was the byproduct of decades of occupation, the byproduct of the emptying out of Palestine, of much of Palestine in 48, the further emptying out of much of it in 67, and the failure to resolve the issues that came out of this. People are perfectly capable, I think, of understanding the crises that were produced in the immediate aftermath of the Holocaust, with hundreds of thousands of Jews languishing in displaced person camps all throughout Europe, and with much of the Western coalition being unwilling to resolve the issue within the borders of those states, the responsibilities they had to these refugees. And of course, there was a strong moral argument for the establishment of a state for these people. The issue, of course, is that there were already a people in Palestine. And this Westphalian bargain, if it is combined with a particularist ethnic composition of the state, creates compounding issues. And one of those compounding issues is that there are 7 million Palestinians who do not appreciate being stateless. And there are 7 million more who do not appreciate having been displaced. And so here we are. And I think it requires an immediate reconstruction. There's an Egyptian plan which projects a 5-year reconstruction to the tune of a couple $100 billion or more for the immediate building of schools, temporary housing, hospitals in the Gaza Strip. But then there's also the West Bank, where 5 million, roughly, Palestinians live, including in occupied East Jerusalem, where Judaization of East Jerusalem continues, where the quote-unquote controversial, I like to say illegal because it is illegal, E1 settlement plan is being proposed to split the West Bank into a northern and southern half. This stuff is ongoing. Even if the war in Gaza ends, so to speak, the war in Palestine continues because the occupation continues.
Right.
And so,
isn't it so funny how the word controversial is usually a euphemism for like totally evil?
yes, it is a bit funny. The controversial plan to empty the Gaza Strip of its people, or the controversial plan to give half of Ukraine to the Russians, and so on.
I don't know why anyone would feel like that merits controversy. You know, why are we so up in arms about it? Weird.
What a shock that someone might have a problem with these things.
Yeah, just let it be. Okay, so I have a question about this withdrawal plan.
Yes.
So it looks like essentially it's like a couple of stages where Israeli troops are meant to withdraw basically from like the coast out towards the border of Gaza, right? But then the final stage has them, they essentially own this like strip around the border of it, and there's no real indication of when they would ever vacate that like border. Essentially they just would surround Gaza forever, like with a militarized zone, until what, the Gaza is properly secure from any resurgent terror threat, which feels like never.
Yes, this is a part of the problem of having Trump as president, in addition to just the problem of the U.S. being an unreliable narrator and mediator. The plan, according to reports, had originally envisioned a total withdrawal over a specific period of time. And then in between the time that the president had discussed this plan with Qatar, Turkey, and other states on Tuesday at the United Nations, the previous Tuesday, and the Sunday that it was unveiled, Netanyahu and Ron Dermer, who is his main advisor, they had managed to sneak in these new changes to addendum. And I don't think the Arab states should be particularly surprised, and I don't think they are. Of course, they're quite upset, at least if you listen to Barack Ravid of Axios. But the sentiment that I've seen being reported is that this is the best it's going to be, and that the details can be worked out more later. And tends to be how it is. This tends to be how it is in these negotiations over this particular conflict. I actually have a great anecdote for this. I recall, I want to say it was under the H.W. Bush administration, and I'm not going to remember who exactly was overseeing the portfolio of Palestine, Israel during the H.W.
I think we can
administration.
forgive you.
It goes a little like this. The Palestinian negotiators went to D.C. in the lead up to the Madrid conference, and they said, how can we negotiate over these issues if settlement continues to happen each day? Like, how can we have a negotiation while ongoing in these negotiations, the settlements continue to grow? And the administration essentially said something to the effect of, well, we can't demand a settlement freeze right now. So you're just going to have to take it on credit and on good faith that once you assume some negotiations, you can ask it later on. And that's not a feasible negotiation model. How can you negotiate while land is being ceded each day? It doesn't work that way. And so I think this is similar to what's happening with the withdrawal plan over Gaza. You might have it up right now, actually. If you do, you can tell me if I'm correct. But I believe it also has control over Rafah crossing for the Israelis, and and that would be to the southern tip of the Gaza Strip. And this is in violation of agreements made with Egypt 20 years ago, in which the EU and the PLO or the PNA would have oversight over Rafah crossing. And so, I have no doubt if they're able to maintain that perimeter as a withdrawal line, this militarized perimeter, that they won't leave, and that they'll use it as a pretext for preventing the PLO from assuming governance.
Right. Yeah, it's complete border coverage. It's a total militarized border. With no gaps, no nothing, and the conditions under which it's going to stay there. I mean, like, my city is not totally clear of terrorism or whatever Trump is hoping for, and I live in the United States because he just decides what it is. He'll tell you if you have terrorism or not. Apparently, we in Portland do.
Yes, I want to say also, obviously, you do know this, and also I think even plenty of the listeners will know this. But when we talk about, say, a strip free of terror, I want to push back a little bit, not on your wording, it's obviously the wording of the administration and also of the Israelis, but when we talk about what terror is, it's a very vague term. And, well, if the strip were to be free of terror, does this mean that the Israelis will no longer control the seaport? Does it mean that they'll no longer control the airspace? Is it not terrorizing to have a belligerent occupying power control every element of your life? I believe this is terrorism. It certainly is illegal, according to the ICJ's ruling on the occupation last year, which is a separate case from the ongoing case of genocide brought by the South Africans. But that's terrorism. I would also say that settlement in occupied territory, which is it is a very clear definitional war crime under the Fourth Geneva Convention, that's also terrorizing. And so we know this, you know this, and most of your listeners will know this, but the onus is put on Palestinians. The onus for a good faith advancement is put on the occupied people. And that's a common feature of international diplomacy, but it is just something a bit absurd scenario.
Absolutely.
So we come back to this a lot, right? Which is that it's not violence and it's not terrorism when the state does it. That's just like the state doing state stuff, and that's allowed all the time. Meanwhile, ultimately we're sitting here looking at a condition under which like no teenager can ever throw a rock at a tank, because then we're back to where we're in a state of terror. Unfortunately, we got to keep the military there.
Yes. I also go back to, and I think if we're going to discuss more in detail the plan proposed by the Trump administration, one of the things which is very important to look at with clarity is that this plan, and I go back to it constantly, and this is what we said at the top of the hour, it's very unsurprisingly non-political. It does not address any of the fundamental questions. And I think perhaps there's an argument to be made, and I'm sure if one were to ask Mr. Jake Sullivan, the former national security advisor to the Biden administration, I'm sure if someone were to ask Steve Witkoff, why is this so non-political? Why does it not address some of the bigger questions? You'll hear a lot of the same things that were said in 1991 and 1992 in the lead up to Oslo. We need to build trust. We need to have a trust building mechanism. We need to tackle some of the smaller issues before we address the bigger ones. And okay, on paper this sounds okay, right? I mean, look at the Northern Irish peace process. There are a lot of interim mechanisms in place. There are a lot of transitory mechanisms in place. But there were some fundamental things that changed as a result of the Northern Irish peace process, which did not happen under Oslo. The Northern Irish peace process resulted in an open border, and it resulted in a Catholic legal equality, and it resulted in tangible steps taken by the British. If I'm in a negotiation with a man who has a gun on me, and that is what the Palestinians are in this situation. There are people who are having negotiations with those who have a gun on them. It's hard to build trust if the dynamic is you give up everything and I give you nothing. And so, whereas will the blockade be lifted permanently as a result of this plan? It doesn't seem like it, especially if the Israelis are able to maintain that perimeter. Will Palestinians be able to freely travel once again for the first time in over 20 years from Gaza to the West Bank? It doesn't seem like it.
Right.
Will there be elections, and will all Palestinians be able to freely participate in that? It doesn't seem like it. And so what is being addressed? The only thing that seems to be really being addressed is Israel's international standing. And that's in fact what Trump told CNN and Axios a couple of days ago. One of the motivating factors for ending the war is to reverse the free fall of Israel's international standing.
Right. We want to rescue them from being like a pariah state because, that's difficult for them.
Yes.
Meanwhile, like Netanyahu won't even commit to the idea of the Palestinian Authority being given any power.
And it's not like the authority. It's not like the authority is a feverishly anti-Israel entity. It has military cooperation with the Israelis and recognizes the state of Israel already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, this is like all fake bullshit diplomacy. And
yes.
we go back to, technocratic, apolitical solutions. We'll figure out that stuff later. That's literally the purpose of you being at these negotiations, is to figure out.
You're supposed to be figuring it out.
You got to figure this stuff out now. It is important to figure it out now.
Otherwise, what are you doing in there? Playing Candy Crush? Like, what's happening?
It's absurd, but again, it speaks to ultimately what I suspect is a selfish unwillingness. You look at how our leaders appraise what makes a good deal.
Yes.
It is, as what you just said, Layla, I get all and you get nothing, except that what we actually know from functional history and diplomacy is that the only deals that ever work are those which do provide mutually to some degree.
Yes.
And
consequences for breaking the deal. Like, what's happening there? Is there anything that's even slightly flavored like consequences?
No, this is again, we're going to be a little crude, and this is what I was saying earlier about how it's fake, but I'm sure we've all seen the "Fell for it again" award meme before.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think this is a great case of, and I want to be somewhat fair. It's not as if the Palestinians, any of the factions in Palestine, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Fatah, any of these groups, whatever one may think of them, it's not exactly like they have a strong negotiating position. Look at what's going on, of course. But I mean, look at the previous quote unquote attempt at nuclear talks between the Iranians and the U.S. It's not unreasonable to look at what was going on and say that it was a pretextual diversion for what ended up being the Israeli assaults on the nuclear sites. Look at the attempts to have talks in the immediate prior days of the strike on Doha. Look at the attempts to have talks on disarmament in Lebanon and see the strikes on Beirut. This is again and again a case where there is no enforcement mechanism. And in Hamas's case in particular, when Hamas released the one prisoner of war, I believe his name is Adon Alexander. I may be wrong. They did so on the credit from Witkoff, Steve Witkoff, that Trump would then use the power of his office to bear onto Israel for a ceasefire. And that just simply didn't happen. It literally just did not in any way. Witkoff reneged on his word, and Trump, of course, probably never even gave his word. And so, for whatever it's worth. And so we're here, and it's very possible that the hostages will be released, the prisoners of war will be released, and then we'll see a resumption of conflict. I do think, and this is something that
it's not like he hasn't signaled that that's the plan.
Yes. I do think, and this is something I go back and forth on, I do think the dynamic internationally may change significantly if Hamas were to release all these prisoners of war and hostages, and then the Israelis resume the war. It would take away a sort of cudgel that the Europeans have had in particular about the
and it's a powerful one. Anytime you say anything about Palestinians and what they're going through, you always get replies that are like, well, if they would just release the hostages. Yeah. So I can see that.
Yes. And I think that may change things. But then on the other hand, and as we talked about in regards to the West Bank, it's not hard from the Palestinian perspective. In fact, I think it's mandatory from the Palestinian perspective to see that the Palestine Liberation Organization relinquished arms struggle over 30 years ago. Yeah. And they recognized the state of Israel over 30 years ago. And what did it result in? Frankly, it resulted in the further shattering of the Palestinian cause. And so this is something that I try to say to Westerners as a so-called advocate of the Palestinian cause. I don't know if I would think of myself so highly as that. But I think if you're going to think about the issue, and if you're going to talk about, say, armed resistance versus non-armed resistance versus non-violent resistance, whatever one may think about it, it's impossible to deny, if you are a serious person, if you're thinking about this issue in a critical way, it's impossible to deny that the framework that the West has provided to the issue does not have extremely perverse incentives for Palestinians. On the one hand, if we are nonviolent, we get killed. And on the other hand, if we're violent, we get killed. And so what are people going to choose in that situation? More often than not, they're not going to choose to do nothing and get killed. They're going to choose to do something and get killed. And that's right. Not
and lying down, peacefully and allowing it to happen doesn't get as much international attention either.
Yes, exactly. I think it's quite, and this was something that was really apparent in 2021. And I think 2021 was really the turning point for a lot of young people in our cohorts. But there were virtually no serious discussions of the Sheikh Jarrah case in East Jerusalem, occupied East Jerusalem, the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, in the months of January, February, March, and April 2021, even though this was an extreme flashpoint in the Palestinian struggle. It was a case where the Israelis were trying to evict Palestinian families over a racist legal framework that was imposed in the 1950s, wherein Israeli Jews could claim property in East Jerusalem, but Palestinians, even Palestinian citizens of Israel, this is something that should be noted, even Palestinian citizens of Israel could not claim property lost in West Jerusalem or in the rest of Israel. Only Israeli Jews have that property reclamation right. And so there was an attempt to evict these families. Very little coverage of the issue in those months. And then in May of 2021, the Israelis stormed Al-Aqsa and Hamas began a retaliation campaign. And that's when suddenly people were talking about Sheikh Jarrah. Well, where were the reporters? Where were the American press, the Associated Press reporters, the CNN reporters, the Washington Post reporters? Where were they when uh, hundreds of nonviolent protesters marched in Sheikh Jarrah every day? Nowhere. And suddenly we have an outburst of violence. We have a conflagration, and
Now
now
we're
it's all
here.
the discussion. There's no
Yeah.
urgency unless there's armed struggle, and so it is a very perverse set of conditions. And so unless
Yep.
you provide a pathway, unless there's a pathway out of this, then I'm not really sure why people are surprised that this will continue to spiral.
Right. And again, we are perhaps on the precipice of some type of agreement reached, but it's really just the agreement that some things have been resolved while settlement continues to be worked on.
Yes,
I
it's a
mean,
deferral. It's a deferral of
right.
the fundamental questions.
But again, it's to put it just for our listeners into perspective, it's an agreement to stop fighting so that one side can continue to do something that is internationally deemed illegal. I mean, I'm just, I guess, confused, and not such that it would be, I guess, really a question, but it seems confusing that everyone on the international stage is like playing along with this whole deal. Like, yes, we're going to get a peace agreement, but also like, don't think about all of the other illegal things that are going to continue to happen.
I think, and to maybe I don't know how y'all are feeling on time, but I think maybe to go in a slightly different direction for a minute. There's an excellent. I always try to suggest this, and I'm sure I even suggested it last time we had this discussion. I always suggest that if someone wants to learn a bit more about how to think about the resolution of the conflict, and I think this is a very loaded term. What is the resolution of the conflict? Most people only think about it in terms of the narrow two-state framework. And there are two things to talk about in that frame. One, the two-state framework as envisioned by Palestinians and the Arabs is extremely different. In fact, you might as well even say that it is an outright different framework than the two-state framework envisioned by the U.S. and Israel in particular. I think the Europeans somewhat straddle this line and others straddle the line. But for the U.S. and the Israelis, a two-state framework would produce a Palestinian state, so to speak, a quote-unquote state, which has no control over its borders, no control over its airspace, no military, no independent foreign policy making, and would be extremely reliant upon the Israelis, the Jordanians, and the US. And it would be something a lot like the Bantustans of South Africa, but perhaps a bit more polished up, because people forget that some of these Bantustans were in fact nominally independent states. The South African model of apartheid relied upon the idea that these were not integral parts of South Africa, even if South Africa had real control over them. And that's the model that the US and the Israelis have long held on to. For the Palestinians, there's a want for an independent, for those who want a two-state solution, there's a want for an independent Palestinian state with a capital in East Jerusalem and with a right to return and with a decision-making authority over the key fundamental parts of sovereignty. And so there's that. But then also, for Palestinians, the issue has not necessarily always been about Westphalian sovereignty. If you were to ask Palestinians, and there was great polling on this in some of the Palestinian and Arab barometer polls, if you were to ask them what the number one political issue is, it's the refugee question. It's not necessarily Westphalian sovereignty. And so there's a lot of flotation with, say, a hard two-state solution, a soft two-state solution where you have shared borders, like an EU thing, or like the Confederation, a single state, and so on. But much like how the early Zionist movement of the 1900s had not yet settled on Westphalian statehood and a particularist framework for statehood, there was still a bit of an amorphousness to the resolution of the conflicts. And so if you were to ask us, what would solve this? It's not necessarily a two-state project, but it is rooted in the desire for equality, for the right to live on the land. That's the fundamental thing. Displacement is the fundamental issue. The right to live as an Arab on historic Palestine is the fundamental question. And so, to that end, I recommend if you're a listener, you should read Shifley Telhami and Mark Lynch. They have an excellent collection called The One State Reality. How to confront that one state reality is a question that I think the next generation of American policymakers will make their big struggle, how people who are our age will make their big struggle. As we're not wedded to these cliches anymore, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about how to resolve the question of apartheid and how to live in a post-genocide situation. And so I think that is an excellent thing to read. And then I would also recommend reading Robert Malley's new book. I don't have the title off the top of my head, but it's about the two-state solution as a framework.
Well, Layla, al-Sheikh, how grateful are we? Well, so grateful. We'll have to have you back for another time, another go around. Hopefully the news will be better when we do get to hang out again. We haven't had much good to chat about in our first two chats, but we're hopeful. Layla, before we let you go, can you remind our listeners where they can read all of your thoughts and musings and wonderful work and anything else that you've got for them?
Yes, God willing, we have a ceasefire by the next time, a permanent one by the next time we discuss things. But in terms of my work, you can find me on Blue Sky at diplomatofnight.com. I write. I believe I have my blog on there. Not on our land, I think is the name. I may be flubbing the name at the moment. It's still very early in the morning for me. And I have work in The Nation, in the Center for International Policy, and so on. And yes, I highly recommend, if you are curious about the topic in more detail, read those books I mentioned: Shifley Telhami, Mark Lynch, Robert Malley. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we will link to those resources in your description / whatever caption it is under whatever platform you're viewing or listening to this on, in all conditions, in all places. Amen. And Layla, thank you for being with us. This has been really helpful. Yeah. And this has been, you know what it is, Half the Answer, where understanding a question is half the answer. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Half the Answer, presented by Liberal Currents. You can find Half the Answer anywhere you get your podcasts. Liberal Currents is an entirely listener and subscriber-funded publication, which includes programs like Half the Answer and Neon Liberalism. So, if you like what you've heard and wish to contribute, you may do so at liberalcurrents.com and through Patreon. And remember, understanding a question is half the answer.